Today's webinar is about AI and digital maturity in biopharma contract manufacturing. The session is based on original research in which we surveyed over 50 CDMOs globally about where they stand on their digital transformation journey. The results were really interesting. It confirms something that we hear a lot of, and certainly it's one of the themes we hear a lot at PharmaSource and at CDMO Live, that while 92% of contract manufacturing organizations tell us that digital requirements are now being raised in negotiations. Actually, none of them who answered the survey said that they were able to offer full integration with their customers. And 60% said that they were still operating at preliminary maturity levels. So there's a real gap that's opening up. That's something which is very clear between the customer market expectations and the operational reality. And something that we hear a lot about is frustration from the pharma companies who often want true digital transparency, the type of digital transparency we expect in every other part of our lives in 2025 going into 2026. So, over the next 45 minutes, the MasterControl team will walk us through some of the key findings from that research. They'll be telling us how the CDMOs are struggling, in which areas those are, but also what's working. And critically, how the industry can start to close this digital divide before it becomes a competitive barrier. So to guide us through the research, I'm pleased that we're joined today by Caitlin Minton-Smith and Nicole Sherman, both from MasterControl. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Nicole, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for the great intro. Excited to dive into this research. Let's just take a quick look at where we'll spend our time. As Luke mentioned, really excited to dig into the data for the industry on digital transformation, sponsor expectations. Of course, AI is such a hot topic right now, looking at the state of adoption there, and then some strategies for kind of moving up in digital maturity, what makes sense based on where you are today, where you'd like to be tomorrow. Before we dig into that proprietary research, I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin to just ground us in the CDMO landscape and what we're seeing in the market before we look at our research results. Caitlin, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. So, as Nicole said, we wanted to ground this a little bit before we dived into the research. And I wanted to start in an area where it was something that many of you have likely lived firsthand, which is really how dramatically the expectations of CDMOs have evolved. So if you look back 10 or even 15 years, most contract manufacturers were viewed as capacity providers. So sponsors came to you because they needed manufacturing expertise or extra capacity. It was very much a, here's our process, here's our batch, help us get it made kind of relationship. But that model has really shifted. So today, what we see is that CDMOs aren't just filling those capacity gaps. You are being asked to be strategic partners. And this means deeper collaboration, more specialized manufacturing, and in many cases, shared risk and accountability. And with that shift toward deeper strategic partnerships, the expectations on CDMOs have never been higher. Sponsors are really starting to evaluate you beyond the ability just to make product. They're starting to look at how you make that product. So as you can see here, this is not our research. This is some research over the past couple of years from kind of some industry folks like Accenture. But what you'll see here is that sponsors are really starting to gravitate toward those contract manufacturers who are digitally strong. So they're looking for systems that are connected, that are compliant, and that are really able to scale without a lot of friction. And that's why we wanted to start here. Digital maturity is becoming a baseline expectation in a lot of conversations. And in many cases, it's starting to become a deciding factor inside of that vendor selection process. So with this context in mind, I'm going to pass it back to Nicole so that we can start to really dig into the research.
Great, let's do it. So Luke mentioned our sample. So this was a global study. You can see a range of facility locations across the globe, as well as revenue. So we've got maybe more of that smaller startup to that kind of bigger global enterprise. So wanted to just briefly share kind of that landscape of CDMOs that were our survey respondents. So let's start with the current state of digital transformation. Before we get to current state, we also looked at kind of key goals that are going to ultimately drive that digital maturity investment for a lot of CDMOs. So those top three you can see on the slide here, end-to-end traceability really stands out as a key goal or where folks would like to get with digital maturity. Next is automation with batch records, real-time validation. Rounding out those top three is again workflow automation and scalability. So you can see these key themes around automation, greater visibility into data, into real-time processes are just key aspects of digital maturity that likely most folks surveyed are not there, but that's that North Star of where they'd like to be more flexible, more agile, more proactive versus reactive. So that's where they'd like to be. Reality is most folks are here, right? So we presented a maturity spectrum starting with manual there on the left. Most, if not all, processes and manufacturing facilities on paper. And then you mature to emerging, maybe some digital systems in place, maybe some lines are digitized, but not all the way through to intelligent, which would be that ultimate goal of everything's connected, automated, you've got AI maturity across your facilities. Not surprising that we see very few folks claiming to be intelligent, but you can see most CDMOs are early days, right? There is still a decent chunk of manual, but we see that kind of emerging piece, maybe some limited digitization, a bit of connectivity between maybe some systems. And I think a foundational challenge that this state presents is a lack of data connectivity that can inform critical decisions. So again, I think that's part of that end-to-end traceability that they're working towards that is probably a big pain point at the moment. So that's that current landscape. For those in attendance, just wondering where you think you fall within this maturity module or model, if that emerging is ringing true with you as well. So after digging in a layer deeper is we then ask which of the following systems does your company currently have in place? So, what has been digitized? We see that on the left, organizations do tend to have their QMS, a digital QMS in place with kind of a majority there. Even if it's paper on glass or a SharePoint or Excel spreadsheets, whatever format, some level of digital for QMS, followed by CRM and ERP, kind of round out those systems that have at least 50% of those respondents said that those systems are digitized. I highlight manufacturing related systems, paint a little bit of a different picture here. We see that manufacturing facilities are much less likely, sorry, to have an EBR or an MES or an EDHR in place in their manufacturing facilities. So this is talking to some folks in the industry, something that we have heard before as well, that that QMS might be in place, but their production records might still be on paper. So wondering if that kind of holds true for folks on the call or listening in. Does that feel maybe easier, or is that more of a priority to get that kind of quality docs, training, quality events digitized prior to production records? So let's just click ahead here. We wanted to focus on, okay, those folks who are leaning more connected, more integrated. Where are they seeing success? That's the why behind why they've been able to mature a bit more compared to some other folks who, again, were in that more emerging category. So for those who indicated, again, they're connected or integrated, they might have more of the MES across multiple sites or multiple lines. There's some key reasons for success here. Strategic system integration, a continuous improvement mindset for the organization, that's really critical. The ability to showcase ROI for those digital investments. And then they're able to lay that foundation for AI across the organization, establishing broad cross-functional use cases, and et cetera. So these are some common themes for maturity success. So again, there is this kind of underlying cultural mindset shift across organizations that seems to be really critical. Everyone's got to be in to make it work. So that's really that kind of continuous improvement mindset, that ability to be able to show that investment paying off. We're also seeing a shift in staffing, right? So folks more adept to be able to operate in that more modern, more digital environment that it looks different than legacy operations have in the past. So being able to bend and flex, modernize just the entire ecosystem. And wanted to address the flip side as well, common barriers on the other side of the coin. I don't think any of these are surprising, but these are just key challenges that we continue to see in the market for not being able to get to those goals that we saw on that first slide. Resource constraints, a huge one. Just where do we prioritize? And digitization just doesn't make it to the top of the list. A key one was legacy infrastructure, legacy processes, just the overwhelming approach to have to modernize an entire facility. It just is almost too much of an undertaking for some folks, or their equipment is outdated. This idea of resource constraints across several different aspects of your manufacturing facility really stands out as a core barrier for being able to go from those paper-based processes to a more digital connected ecosystem that's the ideal. So that those are really the key themes for a lack of maturity. So moving from overall digital maturity to AI adoption. So a layer on top of digitizing processes is AI. I think the industry as a whole feels a pressure, maybe from sponsors, maybe just from a competitive stance, to evaluate, implement, and adopt AI as just something that shows innovation within the industry, and to be able to show sponsors that you're future proofing, forward thinking in your operations. And we want to just mute. And maturity actually looks very similar to the digital maturity curve, where we see most folks either not touching AI at all yet, or in early days pilot projects. So definitely not broad implementation to get to that kind of intelligent operation, but just starting, which isn't a bad thing, right? Starting small, piloting projects, seeing what works, what doesn't, hopefully kind of doing that due diligence for laying the groundwork for governance across departments in the organization. Some common reasons for why folks have not yet moved beyond pilots align very closely with that limited digital maturity. So AI isn't an organizational priority. And I think we did see that many recognize that their lack of modern systems that's preventing digitization is also a blocker for AI. And those are necessary updates to invest in prior to being all in on AI, which I was really happy to hear from respondents, recognizing that getting those core systems in place to kind of get that data foundation where it needs to be is that step one before they're putting the time and money investment into AI that can be truly meaningful. And I did want to just look at that flip side, because we see we've got a little over 20% of folks who are a little bit further along with maybe a little bit more broad AI, some limited enterprise AI integration. But there are some themes that we saw with the why behind their ability to mature a little bit more with their AI adoption. And some of those include just identifying practical use cases. And I think that's something we're seeing in the market too, where some organizations honestly are tapped out with their Chat GPT or Gemini or Claude deployment within their organization, right? Those LLMs can, that kind of chat interface has a limit, right, to the value it can provide. So being able to really think of those kind of practical agents that are very task oriented or co-pilot in nature to assist folks with very specific tasks, I think we're seeing a movement more there for that more direct ROI. We see a focus on data architecture from these folks that I mentioned that previously is so critical to AI being valuable. And then it's worth noting that commercial use cases stood out as just early successes these organizations have seen. So things like content creation, sales and planning and communication. So I think just even if it's outside of the manufacturing facility, organizations have just noted that more commercial success has been where their AI investment has gone thus far. So I think we can all acknowledge we're definitely ways off from AI-driven autonomous operations. The study confirms that, and I think that's okay. Companies hopefully are being very intentional with AI implementation, taking things kind of step by step, getting governance, validation, regulatory all aligned before full deployment across the organization. And I did want to just call out some industry research outside of this work we did that really brings that piece to light. Is that from a recent Gartner study, they reported that 40% of AI projects would be canceled by 2027 due to escalating cost, weak business value, or insufficient risk controls. That's a big number. It's a lot of investment. And I think, like I said, again, we're starting to see a shift from these kind of vague or general pilots to much more specific use cases that can more directly deliver ROI, those kind of task assistant use cases. So asking our respondents, when do you expect AI to achieve significant value for your operations? You can see most folks are looking at 3+ years, which kind of aligns with where we're seeing their early adoption. I think we'll see a lot of change. The AI landscape changes so quickly. We're going to see a lot of change over the next few years, but they're definitely looking a little further out for real ROI from AI. And just digital maturity, resources continue to be a driver for those barriers in having more of a mature AI adoption. Time and resources, the cost implementation. So again, it's this prioritization conversation of digital. Where do we put our time and investment in it? And we definitely want to see more those digital systems be implemented well, adopted well across the organization. That data foundation, like that all is the foundation that's going to lead to AI 3, 5 years from now being really robust, really meaningful for your organization. So that would definitely encourage folks to, I know Luke put the report in the chat, tons more detail in there around that digital maturity. Hopefully that gave you a great snapshot of kind of those key themes and key kind of status of where we see the industry today with the responses we got from our survey. I'm going to pass it to Caitlin to kind of look at the sponsor expectations that we heard in our survey as well.
Thanks, Nicole. So we're bringing it full circle as we started off talking about expectations in the market, and we're going to finish there as well. So really want to take a couple minutes and think or see from the research what the impact of digital maturity is on sponsor relationships. So earlier we talked about how sponsors are really gravitating towards CDMOs who show real digital maturity, and our research reinforces that completely. 92% of our respondents told us that digital capabilities are increasingly becoming part of the conversation. So these are no longer things that are just happening as an add-on. It's really becoming part of that baseline. And that's something important to think about as you think about the projects that you are going to take on, as you think about your digital maturity, as you think about how you're going to tackle this, is that it's really less of an add-on at this point and more of kind of an assumption that your CDMO partners are going to be increasingly digitally mature. When we look at what sponsors actually expect from their partners, we also see a direct extension of what we talked about earlier. That there's this shift from CDMOs being capacity providers to CDMOs being strategic partners. Sponsors really expect their CDMO partners to move rapidly and help keep programs on track. That's not new, but I do think that there are some things that are piling on in terms of consistency, in terms of visibility, in terms of really being able to respond rapidly to your sponsor's needs. And that kind of leads into, as products become more complex, sponsors really are expecting their contract manufacturing partners to be flexible. So maintain quality while being flexible enough to shift between programs or scale activity as their needs evolve. So they are looking for partners who can maintain reliability. And here's the critical part: adapt with minimal friction. And that adaptability is something that we see not just in the contract manufacturing space, but across all manufacturing in life sciences, really, is that this ability to adapt rapidly is becoming more and more critical. And finally, sponsors really want a partner that feels like an extension of their team. So they want their contract manufacturing provider or partners to provide real-time visibility, to provide technical guidance, and really to provide insights that help anticipate issues before they happen. At the end of the day, really what this shows us is that digital maturity is more than just an operational accelerator. Nicole talked a lot about, from an operational standpoint, how digital maturity can support contract manufacturers and can help you work faster and things like that. But this is really about being competitive. And it really starts to signal, your digital maturity starts to signal that you are a forward-thinking and innovative partner for your sponsors. And this brings us to an important gap. So even though, as we've seen, sponsor expectations are evolving and are rising, unfortunately, the current state of integration between CDMOs and sponsors isn't where it needs to be. So according to our research, only about 1/3 of CDMOs report any kind of automated data exchange or shared portal with their sponsors. For the rest, connectivity is either absent or is limited and really relies on manual data transfer, PDF reports, or batch summaries that only provide visibility after the fact. And this creates real tension. Sponsors want that real-time visibility, but most of their contract manufacturing partners aren't equipped to deliver it yet. However, it also provides a clear opportunity for CDMOs. So those organizations who can provide real-time sponsor visibility will absolutely be the ones who start to stand out among the group. So what does this mean for you? Obviously, we could sit here and talk about the research all day, but how do you start to put that into action is the critical component, right? So as we think about building strategies or about strategies for building maturity, one theme came through loud and clear in the research, and Nicole touched on this earlier, and I'm going to underline it and then put an exclamation point as well, is that successful digital transformation has as much to do with the mindset of the organization and the culture of the organization as with the technology. It is no longer enough just to go digital. Systems alone are not going to solve problems. To really develop lasting change, you have to get those fundamentals right. You have to get people on board, and you have to fix the underlying process issues before layering on digital solutions. Because when your foundation is solid, all of those digital investments, including all of the amazing things that are happening with AI, start to deliver real value rather than just adding noise into a system that's already broken. So, with that mindset in place, we wanted to close with 5 strategic priorities for you to consider. So, number one, like we were just talking about, build the foundation before chasing AI. AI is super powerful, but it cannot compensate for weak data or broken processes. Put your energy into stability and into structure before going after the next hot AI trend. And I would underline this with what Nicole was talking about is you have to unlock this data prior to actually being able to use AI tools. Second, target your implementation gaps with proven ROI. So rather than broad, unfocused transformation type efforts, really focus on areas where digital maturity can drive measurable impact. And this might be in one small area. Maybe take the small win and then expand from there. Number 3, fix your processes before digitizing. This is super, super important. If a process doesn't work manually, making it electronic won't fix it. So again, you really have to stabilize first. You have to build those foundations and then digitize second. And I would hazard go AI third in some cases so that you can fix your processes, have really solid foundations, go into a digital infrastructure, and then use all of that amazing data to drive AI tools. Number 4, solve the sponsor integration problem. So we saw in the research that those sponsor expectations around transparency and kind of a connected system are currently falling short. So finding technology partners who can help you bridge that gap is going to really start to become a strategic priority as you think about how to win in a digital environment. And then finally, really be precise with how you deploy your resources. So digital maturity isn't about doing everything at once. It's about looking at what you've already done, connecting systems, adding new ones, and really over time building resiliency. At the end of the day, digital transformation has no finish line. Frankly, it's not a thing that you get done. It's iterative and it's layered and it builds on systems you already have as much as the systems you have yet to adopt. This is again something Nicole kind of talked about, is about how legacy infrastructure tends to be a barrier or hold people back. And rather than thinking about, oh, digital transformation is this huge thing that we have to undertake, it's really about what have we already done? And where do we have islands of automation or islands of digitization? And how do we start building that connective tissue? Because almost no company is actually starting from ground zero. Everybody has something. Everybody uses email, right? There's a digital tool right there. And really, at the end of the day, the organizations that are most successful tend to be the ones that invest, like we talked about, in those fundamentals. So really, it's about building thoughtfully and maturing with purpose. In other words, start laying the groundwork now for the capabilities that you'll need tomorrow.